According to the New York Times Best 100 Books of the 21st Century, I have bad reading taste. Let's talk about that. Good morning, everyone. How are we today? My name is Cameron. If you have been here before, welcome back. If you haven't been here before, I just make lots of videos about reading and books and everything like that. So, very recently, the New York Times made a list of 100 books, best books of the century so far, since we're technically in the 25th year of this century. They talked to 500, more than 500 I think, 500 authors and publishers and basically people who are kind of a little more qualified than the average reader to rank their favorite books. And they had them each select 10, and then from that selection of 500 lists, they went ahead and kind of figured out what were the most mentioned books of those lists. So, yeah, today we're just going to be talking about it. I'll link the original article in the bio below, and you can kind of let me know your thoughts on the thing. But the reason I said that the New York Times said I had bad taste is because I've actually only read 2 of the books on the list. Does that make me a bad reader? No, it doesn't actually make me a bad reader, but it does make me very aware of this scenario that maybe I'm not as well versed in books as maybe I would like to be. So today we're going to go over some of the books that I have heard of, some of the authors that I've read where one of their books made it onto the list, several of the books that I have actually been interested in, and then the 2 books that I have actually read. And then at the end, I will also give a list of a few books that either I was shocked not to see, whee! So, maybe I should make this announcement first. This is Flash. He's my new kitten. Look up, bubby. He said no. Sorry to interrupt what the video is about today, but yeah, brand new kitten. So if you see me glancing around at him, here he is. That's what he's doing. And then the final thing we're going to discuss is either books I was shocked to not see on there, and then some books that I personally would have put on there. So, let's go ahead and do that. Let's talk about some of the authors that I have heard of that I saw on the list, but I have not read their books. One was Ann Patchett. I believe the book I've been seeing all over the place is Tom Lake, I think is what it's called, and I think Meryl Streep narrates the audiobook. But I know she is a big deal. I have heard about her works before, and the book of hers that made it 98th on the list was Bel Canto. And then there were 2 authors that I saw multiple times that I have seen other booktubers recommend, specifically Jack Edwards has recommended both Jessamine Ward, who had 3 books on this list, and Zadie Smith, who had 2 books on the list. So if you guys have read any of that before, please let me know. I would be very interested in reading it. And then there was a large list of books that I have heard of before, but I've never actually had the time to pick up and read, or made the time, maybe is the better phrase, to pick up and read. But yeah, there were quite a few. I have heard of Station 11, which is a post-apocalyptic book. I actually had a coworker that I used to have recommend that one to me, and honestly I had completely forgotten that I was really interested in reading it until I saw it pop back up on this list. So it's probably going to get added to my TBR, whatever my TBR looks like. I don't do a whole lot of TBR, but yeah, Detransition Baby by Tori Peters was also on this list, and I think that is a beautiful book cover. It's one I commit kind of the cardinal sin of judging books by their covers very often, so a lot of these books that I've heard of and have been maybe a little interested in have been just books with really beautiful covers. And then one that was absolutely shocking to me that showed up. I have heard mixed reviews about this online, and not so much, maybe just the ones I personally was following weren't a huge fan of this book, because I know a lot of people just love this book. But Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin was actually on this list, which was kind of shocking to me because I think it's the only one on this list that I know for a fact is a romance. And also it's so recent. I was shocked to see it on here because like I said, I've heard mixed things about it. So now that it's on here, maybe consider me influenced because I might actually pick it up. If you've read it before, please comment down below because I would love to hear a little more about it or a little more about your experience without any spoilers, because now I might actually be interested in reading it. I saw that A Visit from the Goon Squad was on this list. That's by Jennifer Egan. I didn't know that was a real book. I gotta be honest, I've heard people referencing it and I always thought it was just a joke. So consider me interested, because I thought this was a bit and now I found out it's like a real book. And it's also 39th on the list, so it's pretty high up there. Fun Home by Alison Bechdel. If you haven't figured out just from the way I am, I'm a theater kid, so Fun Home was a title I've recognized. The concept of it seemed a little too sad to me, so if you've read it before, please let me know. The Road by Cormac McCarthy. This is one I have heard more negative things than not about because Cormac McCarthy doesn't use punctuation in his writing. He might just not use quotation marks or like paragraph breaks. There's something he doesn't include that makes his books really, really confusing to read. So, but I also know like a lot of high level authors have read it and are like, this is the best book ever. So like, I'm not surprised to see it on there, but I'm also like, everyone I've personally talked to about The Road was like, it was a really, really hard book to read. So I think there is a certain aspect of a lot of these surveys or these lists weren't anonymous. Like, they didn't compile all the data. So there is a little bit of concern of a lot of these people voting on certain books to make themselves look not better, but to like uphold a reputation of like, oh yes, I'm a really well-versed, like really well-educated, I know lots of books kind of person. And I'm gonna talk about this a little more when we talk about some of the books like I would personally put on the list. But I think there is a certain point of a lot of these authors are like, oh, how can I sound, for lack of a better word, how can I sound pretentious? And I think that's very interesting because several of the books that I recognized, I was like, I don't know if I'd consider it the best of all everything. But there were definitely some authors on the list that I haven't actually read, like the work that was on the list, but I have read other of their works. Like Toni Morrison had a book on there that was published in 2008, I believe, called A Mercy. Donna Tartt, of course, was on there. Miss Donna Tartt, Miss I only publish a book every 10 years. I read Secret History last year, and I gotta be honest, I wasn't that impressed by it. Is that a scandalous thing to say? Like, should I just leave BookTube now? Like, I don't know what it was, but seeing the Goldfinch on that list was entirely not surprising to me. Another one that I was not surprised to see, I almost said was surprised. Another one I was not surprised to see was Jeffrey Eugenides, I think is how you pronounce it, who wrote The Virgin Suicides, which was a book I read last year that I thought was just excellent. And his book Middlesex, which was published in, I believe, 2002, was on this list. So if you all have read any of these things before, let me know if they're actually good, because some of this list I'm talking about it again, but I was just kind of shocked by. So, I also saw a book by Han Kang. I read Human Acts earlier this year, which is a book about a young boy who dies in a riot, and just about everybody who's around him reacting to that and how they like respond to his death and what it motivates them to do afterwards. And I thought that was great. A book by the same author that was on the list was The Vegetarian, and I believe it was translated by the same person, and I think her translations were just excellent. N.K. Jemisin was also on this list, and she is a Black science fiction author, and I read one of her other like duologies, which I think is The World We Make. Her book, The Fifth Season, was on there, and I've heard it's very, very good. So if you've read that, please let me know. I am kind of trying desperately to get into science fiction. I don't read very much science fiction, so maybe if you have any science fiction recommendations, comment down below because I would really like to know them. And then of course, pivoting into the 2 books I have read, Elena Ferrante's My Brilliant Friend, which was number 1 on the list. I read that earlier this year. It is an Italian novel. It is the first of a 4-part series, I think. I've only read My Brilliant Friend. I thought it was really, really good. I don't know if I personally would have put it at like number 1 best book in the last 25 years, but seeing it at the top did make me go, yeah, that's completely valid. I can see why a lot of people would put this on the list. There's something to love about that book for pretty much everyone. It's a story about 2 girls growing up together and like the impact that each of them have on each other's lives in the Italian countryside. I really, really enjoyed it. Elena Ferrante also had 2 other books on this list. Her book, The Days of Abandonment, was 92 on the list, and The Story of the Lost Child, which I believe is the final book of the Neapolitan series, which My Brilliant Friend is the first of. That one was 80. So, and I think it's just a good sign when an author has multiple books in the top 100 books of the last 25 years, which is why I'm like interested to read Jesmyn Ward and Zadie Smith. So if you've read anything by any of them, please let me know. But My Brilliant Friend was definitely a really, really good book. I really enjoyed it. And the other book I've read on this list, which I was shocked it was not higher because it was my favorite book of last year, which was Demon Copperhead by Barbara Kingsolver. There's also an aspect where maybe I'm not surprised because it is technically a retelling of David Copperfield. So maybe people were just looking for more originality. But Demon, the character, leaps off the page. He is so real, you could almost feel him. And there's such an interesting analysis of Appalachia and where it's at currently and like the drug crisis that's going on there and stuff like that. Oh my goodness. This book is incredible. I've talked about it in so many videos and I feel like I need to say it again. I love that book. I recommended it to my grandmother and she read it and she was like, that was an incredible book. So if you can't trust me, you can trust my grandma. But yeah, so only reading 2 books on this list was shocking to me. I would have at least thought I would have read 5 books on this list, but no, this list went totally different directions from what I was thinking it would go in. So now we're gonna kind of discuss like, here are some books that the direction I thought it was gonna go in, and then here are some books that I personally would put on this list. So I only have, let me double check, but I think I only have a few that I was like shocked that they weren't on there. And that would be the infamous A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara. This book, I don't know how to say it without seeming rude because there were definitely parts I read this book and I really enjoyed, and then there were parts that I really didn't. But this is like the pretentious reader book of current years, I would say. The book details the life of a young man who grew up in foster care and his 3 best friends, and just like their entire lifespan and their effects on each other, and it's really good. So much of this book is so tragic, and I personally was not a huge fan of the ending, which is why I don't think it would be on my top 10, but I was shocked to see it was not in the top 100. It is very recent though, maybe not very, but it's definitely recent. Let me see if I can find the publication date. So maybe it was just too recent to cross people's minds, but it is a little bit of a slog in the sense of it's 600 pages and it's a hard read. So maybe that's why it didn't make its way onto the top 100. But it is a very, very good book. Okay. Now I found it. 2015. So it's 9 years old, I mean. But interesting book. Really, really well written. Like, even though I wasn't necessarily a big fan of a lot of the plot choices that were made, I still can't deny that it's one of the best written books I've ever read. All of the characters just jump off the page at you. You find yourself very interested. Sometimes you definitely need to take breaks just because of the heavy topics, but very, very good. And the fact that it was like a National Book Award finalist, to me indicates, that's what that little thing is there, to me indicates that like maybe it would show up a little bit more on these lists, because there were several Pulitzer Prize winners on the top 100 list, as there should be. They won the Pulitzer Prize for a reason. But this one was just, I was surprised to see it wasn't there. This one, if you had asked me like a month and a half ago what books I would have bet would have been on this list, this 100% would have been one of them. So, and then a book, this is kind of like a book that I'm shocked to not see on there, but a book that I also personally would have put on there. The Book Thief was not on the list, which is shocking to me because I feel like it is easily one of the best books I've ever read. And I think, tragically, because it is more middle grade, if I had to say, like I think it's directed more towards kids. I think that's why it probably didn't make it on here. But I would put this, like if I were to list 10 pretentious works that I think deserve it, and I keep saying pretentious, I swear I'm not meaning it with bad connotations by any means, but I don't know, I truly think this is like an incredible book. It details a young Jewish girl during the Holocaust who has to go into hiding and discusses, like, she is the book thief because she needs something to do and they're burning books all over the place. And there's so many interesting parts of this book, like it's narrated by death and there's so many interesting things, and obviously I think it's a really formidable piece of Holocaust and World War II like historical fiction, but it is so good. It's been such a long time since I've read this. I will probably reread it sometime in the next few weeks. But it is truly incredible. I was shocked to see that it wasn't on the list. But if you haven't read this, really, really good. Both of the books I just kind of recommended, A Little Life and The Book Thief, are both very heavy. Obviously, this one is quite literally about World War II and the Holocaust and the persecution of Jewish people in Europe at that time. But yeah, it is so good. I definitely recommend picking this up. It like, once again, it's good enough that I was shocked that it was just not on the list at all. Which, that's crazy to me. That is crazy to me. And I think this book came out in 2005, by the way. Ugh. So, this one might seem like a joke to you when I say it to you. The reason I know it didn't make it on there, on like the list essentially, is because it is a YA book. And I know YA is not necessarily the most respected of genres, but I think this book has literally changed the way Gen Z and like younger millennials thought about a lot of things in society and in the US government. And there are parts of this book that quite literally changed our vernacular and introduced like new phrases into our everyday speak. And you know what time it is. It's The Hunger Games. And you might be sitting there being like, this book would have never made it onto the list. I know, but I also think it deserves to make it on. Just the level of impact that this series and its like movie counterparts have like placed on society, and specifically people my age, is insane. I do think it's the reason why Gen Z is one of the more politically active. It's not the sole reason, obviously, but I do think it's one of the reasons why Gen Z is a lot more politically active than maybe generations before it. And we're very involved, and we also don't really put up with anything. We know how to stand our ground. We know how to fight for what we believe in. And I genuinely think one of the pieces of media that has made us this way is The Hunger Games. Like, impact alone, it should have been on the top 100. And additionally, for a YA series, incredibly well written. All of the characters are excellent. You're on the edge of your seat the entire time you're reading it. Like, there's a lot of suspense, but it's also balanced really nicely with some very introspective things. And it's also, because it's written for a little bit younger readers, it doesn't necessarily treat them like they're dumb. Like, it's not so as explicit as it could be, even though it's like basically a big criticism of the of the culture of the current United States. And she also exclusively writes books when she feels like she has something to critique about US culture, which she's coming out with a new one soon, and I'm so interested about that one. Her big inspiration for the new one was actually about media and how we respond to the things that are placed to us in media. So anyway, this book, read it. If you haven't, if you are one of the few people who has not read this book, please read it. This list also was all books. They didn't limit on genre, they didn't limit on anything like that. So there were several nonfiction choices. And I have said this before on this channel, I'm not a huge nonfiction reader, but I definitely read nonfiction. So I do have several nonfiction books that I think should have made it onto this list. The first one is I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jeanette McCurdy. No. Before you say anything, before you look at me and you're like, Cameron, this is just a big book talk book. Rah. Hold on, I don't know if you can hear, there's a car growling outside. Anyway, but I have been reading a lot of memoirs recently, and I think I'm Glad My Mom Died deserved... Oh my god, get out of here. All right, now he's getting out of here. That's so obnoxious. Anyway, but I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jeanette McCurdy. Before you say anything about this, I have been reading several memoirs of recent times. I've also read my fair share of celebrity memoirs. Jeanette McCurdy's memoir stands far and above the best one. Probably one of the best memoirs it's definitely top 3 memoirs I've ever read. I think she's got an incredible voice. I am eagerly awaiting for when she writes her next book, if she writes her next book, because every part of that is so detailed. It goes over some very, very, like, tragic and traumatic things that happened to McCurdy as, like, a public figure as a child actor, and, like, her growing up with a mom who was very, very abusive towards her, and her, like, mental health struggles and stuff like that. And it's so interesting. She makes a writing choice to make her writing younger when she is younger in the story. Oh my gosh. I would have loved to see that book. And I know the reason it probably didn't make it onto the list is because celebrity memoirs are really not taken seriously as a medium, which I think that's a fair thing because a lot of them are like ghost written, essentially, which I'm sure I could make a whole nother video on ghostwriters. If you're interested, please let me know. I would love to do some more research on that. But I think it's just truly an excellent autobiography. Like, it's so good. Another nonfiction one that I have my theories why it didn't make it on to the New York Times Best 100 Books, but I think an incredible resource and really good nonfiction analysis of the US prison system versus the current, like, status of Palestine as a nation and everything like that is Freedom is a Constant Struggle by Angela Davis. Angela Davis has been an activist since segregation. She is incredible. This book is just a collection of all of her speeches and interviews and essays that she has written about both the topic of the US prison system and Palestine, and like the comparisons to it. And I think it's one of the more significant pieces of literature that I have read this year. It definitely made me think. It was so well done. And yeah, if you haven't read Freedom is a Constant Struggle, if you've been on my channel and you've heard me recommend this like every week, it feels like, it's probably a sign you should go pick it up and read it. It is so good. But yeah, those are my nonfiction picks for the personal ones that I would add to my top 10. So yeah, some other ones. This one sits more on the line of I was shocked that it wasn't on here, but I think this is also pretty new. Tender is the Flesh by Augustina Bazterrica. Oh my gosh, if they don't stop revving their engines, I'm gonna scream. It's very short, it's just 200 pages. It is a universe where something infects the meats and they begin breeding humans for consumption. It's very interesting. It was definitely a philosophical, like, it made me think a lot when I was reading it. It's definitely a horror book. If you're not into that, if you're not into the idea of cannibalism or anything like that, maybe this isn't the book for you. But I thought it was incredible. I thought it was a great book. I thought it was written really well. I think the translator did an excellent job because I want to say the original author. The original book is in Spanish. I don't know the nation that the author is originally from. And I thought about it for weeks afterwards. It was so interesting. You should definitely pick it up because I think I don't want to spoil any of it, but it'll definitely make you think, and I think it's just so well written. And I also think we need like a very specific set of awards for translated works because to me, as someone who really doesn't speak multiple languages, to me it seems so difficult, the idea of translating a whole work and making it still beautiful and eloquent and everything like that. So read that book if you want like a very quick horror, philosophical, makes you think kind of read. Because I would have put that on my top 10 of the last 25 years. Another one that I think needs to go in my top 10 of the last 25 years, Young Mungo by Douglas Stewart. It is a story about a young Irish boy who, during a time of extreme homophobia, kind of discovers that he is gay, and up is to him and his family dynamics and a bunch of stuff like that. In the same way of Demon Copperhead, hi buddy, in the same way of Demon Copperhead, this character can just leap off the page at you. He is so interesting. And the author does just a really, really good job of getting into, I want to say he's like 15 years old, a 15-year-old mind. But yeah, it was, once again, I don't want to spoil any of it for you, but it is so good. It's such a good coming of age. It's definitely a top coming of age novel for me. I love it. I think it's really good. It's just heartbreaking. It's so good. I know I'm terrible at describing these books for you guys, but I'm being so serious. But definitely check this out if you haven't. Or if you read Demon Copperhead and you like Demon Copperhead, you can read that book. And it's very, very good. So I put 3 more fictions on my work. I've got one more sitting beside me, but I want to make sure I'm getting these done. Fledgling by Octavia Butler. I don't know if it's her best work necessarily, but it is the only work she published in, not the only one, but the last book that she published, and it was published in 2005, but it was Fledgling by Octavia Butler. I think her writing, in the same way as Hunger Games, I think Octavia Butler is just so influential on the world of science fiction and historical fiction and a bunch of stuff like that. I think her work is so important and like influential that I felt like she just had to be on this list. And Fledgling was one of her 2 standalone novels that she released, and she released it just before she died, and it's just a very new and interesting take on vampires, which is probably why it didn't make the official list. But just so good, so excellent. I adore that book. There are definitely some questionable topics in it, so check that before you want to read it. But if you're a huge vampire fan and you're looking for something new, that's the book. That is the book for you. It is so, so good. The other one that I don't physically have on me is Almond by Wang Pyung-san. This is a book about a boy whose brain is deformed and he cannot emote regularly. And it's just about his life growing up and like learning to deal with that. I'm not going to go too much into detail. I adored this book. I thought it was so good. In the same way as Young Mungo and Demon Copperhead, the main character just leaps off the page. Can you tell I love character-driven stuff? It is so, 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 so good. So definitely check that out. I'm literally trying my best not to talk too extensively in fears that I'm going to spoil something for you. You know I'm a yapper. You know I'll just talk until something comes out and then I have to edit it later. Anyway, the last book that was one of my first thoughts when I saw this list, where I was like, this one better be on here. It's Babel. I can't, there you go. Now you can see that. Go Flash. It's Babel. It is a historical fantasy that is also an additionally a critique of imperialism and colonialism and what that means. And the world building is excellent. The characters are excellent. This is one of the books that I picked up and read, and I was like, this author is way too smart. And not like even in a bad way. It was just like, she is so smart. I was reading it and I was like, oh my gosh, this might be a little above my head, but in the best way. She doesn't go so above the head that you're like, I don't understand what's going on right now. And I'm really disappointed that it lost out on some awards this year because the award ceremonies were being hosted in China, and it's definitely critical of China because the author, I believe, is Chinese. But sometimes book talk makes like recommendations and they actually really hit the ball out of the park. And this is one of the ones that I took as a recommendation from Book Talk and was just so impressed by. So impressed by. I think it didn't end up, let me see what year it came out. But I think it didn't end up on the list. Yeah, it's 2022. So this is still fairly new. I don't know if it has had long enough to make its way onto a list, but I wouldn't be surprised if as time goes on we see it pop up on more and more lists, because this was also one of my favorite reads from last year. It is really good. It's kind of a beast to get through. It is a lot of pages, but I was on the edge of my seat the entire time. I thought it was so good, and I would definitely recommend you check that out. As for like an official top 10 books of the last 25 years, I don't know if I'll put one out, because there's so many books I love, and also the nature of having favorite books is sometimes I'll like different stuff than you will. Like, one of my favorite books might be a middle grade level book, and that's clearly not what this list was looking for. And I also think there's the nature of like when you are a public facing like figure that is all about books, whether you're an author or a creator or a publisher, or you have like, or one had like a celebrity book club or something like that. I think there is also the nature of like, you have to still make yourself look credible by recommending books that you know are like a little bit hoity-toity. So I would have loved to see this list as a top 100 submitted anonymously by authors and stuff like that. And then they could come out later and be like, here's the top 10 I chose. You know, those are my thoughts on the New York Times top 100 list. What did you guys think? Did you have any surprises? How many books have you guys read on that list? Because I'm sure a lot of you guys are a little bit better about picking like really well-regarded books than I am sometimes. I'll own up to it. I'm not that bothered by it. But yeah, let me know just your general thoughts on the list. I'll link it down below, so if you watched this whole video and you were like, well, now I gotta go check the list, go do that. What else? Thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, give it a little like, and right next to the like button, like just a little scooted over, is the subscribe button. So if you were so impressed, feel free to subscribe. And ring that bell if you're already subscribed and you want to know when I post. I post shorts very often, five days a week at least. And I post kind of a longer full-length video like this one every week on Sundays. So today I am going to recommend you to go check on that list. If you know a little animal, give your little animal a pet. You want to say hi? Here's Flash. And if you have a local library near you, go visit your local library. I will see you all later. Goodbye.